Rain droplets dance across Officer James Reynolds' dashboard as his patrol car glides through the twilight shadows of Oakwood Heights, the wealthiest neighborhood in town. His fingers drum impatiently against the steering wheel, while his eyes scan the perfectly manicured lawns and towering Victorian mansions that line both sides of Maple Avenue, the neighborhood where he'd grown up dreaming of living but could never afford even on a surgeon's salary. The autumn wind whips fallen leaves across his windshield as the clock on his dash blinks 7:42 p.m., marking another seemingly uneventful patrol in this exclusive enclave. The radio crackles with routine chatter, but Reynolds barely listens, his mind wandering to the string of unsolved burglaries in the neighboring district that his supervisor had mentioned during the morning briefing. Wealthy neighborhoods like this one could be next, he thinks, justifying his heightened suspicion of anything out of place in these pristine streets. His chest swells with pride, knowing he's the thin blue line protecting these multimillion-dollar homes and their privileged inhabitants. Suddenly his headlights catch movement ahead, a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class performing a perfect parallel park between a Range Rover and a Tesla. The luxury car, worth more than his yearly salary, stands out like a diamond in gold, especially in this section of Oakwood Heights, where most residents are already home at this hour. Reynolds leans forward, his breath fogging the window, as he watches a tall black man emerge from the driver's seat. The stranger moves with confidence, wearing what Reynolds notes is an Italian suit that probably costs more than 3 months of his mortgage. The man retrieves a sleek Montblanc briefcase from the passenger seat, his movements unhurried and practiced as if he belongs here. But Reynolds knows better. After 15 years on the force, his instincts tell him something isn't right. No one matching this description lives in this particular block, at least not according to his mental catalogue of residents. Reynolds' fingers hover over his laptop's keyboard, about to run the Mercedes plates, when he notices the man checking his watch. A flash of gold catches the streetlight. Something about the casual gesture makes Reynolds' blood boil. Here was another one of those types acting like they owned the place, probably casing these houses for a future hit, or worse, already in the middle of something. Switching off his headlights, Reynolds lets his patrol car roll forward, silently watching as the man steps onto the sidewalk and begins walking toward one of the historic Victorian homes, number 2847, the old Henderson Place. If he remembers correctly, the same house that had been up for sale last spring, though Reynolds hadn't heard about anyone new moving in, especially not someone like this. Without further hesitation, Reynolds flips on his light bar, paving the entire street in rotating red and blue shadows. He sees the man freeze mid-step, briefcase still in hand, head turning slowly toward the police cruiser. Already Reynolds is crafting the story he'll tell his supervisor about suspicious behavior and maintaining neighborhood security. As he reaches for his body camera, making sure it's activated, because these types always try to make things difficult, always try to play the race card when caught where they don't belong. Reynolds opens his car door, the familiar creak of metal mixing with the soft patter of rain against pavement. His hand instinctively rests on his holster as he steps out into the mist. This would be a routine stop, he tells himself, just another night protecting and serving the good people of Oakwood Heights from those who don't belong. Marcus Thompson feels the familiar ice in his veins as red and blue lights paint his face in alternating colors, the same colors that have stopped him 15 times before in his 42 years of life. His Harvard law degree and state bar license sit heavy in his briefcase, offering no protection against the prejudice that now approaches him with calculated footsteps through the evening rain. Checking his Patek Philippe watch, a cherished gift from his late father, he realizes with a sinking heart that this encounter will definitely make him late for his son's first piano recital at a conservatory. Little Marcus had been practicing Chopin's Nocturne for 3 months straight for this moment. Keeping his hands visible, Thompson maintains the stance that years of experience and his father's warnings have ingrained in his. Shoulders, relaxed face, neutral body language, unthreatening despite his 6'2" frame. His mind automatically starts documenting every detail. As both a lawyer and a black man in America, The officer's badge number, the exact time, the weather conditions, the witnesses behind curtained windows. He knows too well that these details might matter later, especially as Officer Reynolds approaches with his hand already resting on his weapon, a gesture that speaks volumes about preconceived notions. The rain continues its gentle descent, soaking into Thompson's Italian silk suit, but he doesn't dare move to shield himself from the weather. Each droplet feels like another reminder of his vulnerability in this moment, despite his position as State Attorney General, despite the fact that he's standing in front of his own home of 8 years, despite the family photos that sit just 20 feet away inside his study, showing 3 generations of Thompsons at Harvard Law, the very pictures he had hung himself when he bought this Victorian masterpiece after making partner at his law firm. Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor of 8 years, peers through her bay window, concern etched on her face as she witnesses yet another incident. Thompson had just brought her homemade soup last week when she was down with the flu, had shoveled her walkway all winter, but even her potential testimony feels hollow in this moment as Officer Reynolds closes the distance between them with unprecedented hostility, his bodycam glinting in the growing darkness like a cyclops eye recording what Thompson knows will become evidence either for or against him. Inside his pocket, his phone buzzes, likely his wife Catherine, wondering why he isn't at the recital hall, yet she had texted earlier about saving him a seat in the front row where he could give their son an encouraging thumbs up before the performance. But now that dream of normalcy evaporates into the rainy night air as Reynolds barks his first command in a tone that suggests he has already written the end of this story in his mind. Thompson catches his own reflection in his car window, seeing not the State Attorney General, not the man who prosecuted 3 landmark civil rights cases, not the homeowner who hosts the neighborhood Christmas party every year, but simply what Reynolds sees: a threat, a suspect, an outsider. The weight of his credentials press against him, from his wallet, his bar card, his state Supreme Court badge, his federal prosecutor identification, but experience has taught him that presenting them too quickly could escalate the situation, a lesson learned from countless stories of other professionals who found their credentials meant nothing in moments like these. So he breathes slowly, deliberately preparing himself for what he knows comes next, the familiar dance of power and prejudice playing out once again on his own front lawn, while somewhere across town a piano bench sits empty, waiting for a father who will not arrive on time. The situation spirals into dangerous territory when Thompson quietly mentions his federal clearance level, trying to defuse the mounting tension, but his words seem to ignite something darker in Officer Reynolds' eyes. The rain now falling harder drums against the pavement, matching Thompson's quickening heartbeat. As he watches Reynolds' hand slide closer to his weapon, the gesture speaking louder than any verbal threat, with thunder rolls overhead as if nature itself senses the growing storm between these two men standing on the manicured lawn that Thompson had just paid his gardener to maintain yesterday. Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor of 8 years, stands frozen in her doorway, her hand covering her mouth in shock. She had just shared tea with Thompson and his wife last Sunday, discussing plans for the upcoming neighborhood watch meeting where Thompson was scheduled to speak about community safety. Oh, the bitter irony of this moment cuts through the air as Reynolds deliberately positions himself to block Thompson's subtle attempt to wave at her, interpreting every small movement as a potential threat. The officer's face contorts with a mixture of suspicion and something that looks dangerously like satisfaction. Through the curtained windows of surrounding homes, Thompson spots several neighbors recording the scene on their phones, their devices glowing like fireflies. In the growing darkness, he recognizes the Wilsons, the Patels, and the Garcias, all families who had welcomed him warmly to the neighborhood, yet now they stand as distant witnesses to his humiliation, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of how quickly one's social standing can evaporate in the face of prejudice. Reynolds' voice grows louder, more demanding, as he questions how someone like Thompson could afford to live in this exclusive neighborhood, the emphasis on someone like you slicing through the rain-soaked air. Thompson feels his house keys digging into his palm, the same keys that unlock the grand oak door behind him, the door he had specially imported from Italy when renovating the house 2 years ago. His son's basketball lies forgotten on the front porch next to his daughter's chalk drawings on the steps. These intimate signs of his belonging here seem to mock him as Reynolds demands additional identification, refusing to accept the driver's license that clearly shows this address as Thompson's legal residence. The handcuffs appear with a metallic gleam, catching the reflection of a lightning flash that illuminates the entire street. Thompson watches his keys fall from his grip, landing among the fresh mulch he had spread in the flower beds just last weekend. The sound of metal hitting earth feels like a gong announcing the temporary death of his dignity. His briefcase drops next, spilling papers onto the wet ground, including the speech he was preparing for tomorrow's civil rights conference at the state capitol, where he was meant to address police community relations. Behind him, through his home's bay window, he can see the family photos on the wall, mocking witnesses to this scene. Generations of Thompson men who had fought for civil rights, including his grandfather who had marched with Dr. King, now watching as their descendant, despite all his achievements, stands powerless on his own property. The carved wooden sign reading "The Thompsons Est 2015" swings gently in the wind, its presence an irrefutable testament to his residency that Reynolds chooses to ignore as he roughly secures the handcuffs. Somewhere in the distance, a piano plays, likely from his son's recital hall, where an empty seat in the front row tells its own story of injustice. As Thompson feels himself being led toward the patrol car, he catches a glimpse of his reflection in his home's window, seeing two versions of himself, the respected state attorney general and the man being arrested in front of his own house, both identities now colliding in a moment that he knows will either break him or become the catalyst for change he has spent his career fighting to create. The hoarding cell feels surreal to Thompson as he sits on the cold metal bench in his $3,000 Tom Ford suit, now wrinkled and damp from the rain. The harsh fluorescent lights above cast and sickly glow across the graffiti-covered walls, while the smell of industrial cleaner fails to mask other less pleasant odors around him. Other detainees whisper and stare, some recognizing him from local news coverage, but unsure why. The state attorney general sits among them, looking like he just stepped out of a corporate boardroom. Across the cell, a young man with face tattoos keeps stealing glances at Thompson before finally gathering the courage to speak up, saying he remembers him from the Johnson case last year, where Thompson had prosecuted a corrupt prison guard for inmate abuse. The irony of their current shared circumstance hangs heavy in the recycled air. Thompson merely nods, maintaining his composed exterior, while his mind races through the legal implications of everything unfolding, his photographic memory capturing every detail, every face, every procedural violation that will soon become evidence. Meanwhile, in the break room, Officer Reynolds holds court among his colleagues, his boots propped up on a scratched break room table, as he embellishes his story of catching a smooth-talking con man in Oakwood Heights. His audience, a mix of rookie officers and veterans who laugh at his jokes and praise his instincts, none of them aware that with each passing minute, Reynolds digs his career grave deeper, the coffee in his cup growing cold, as he describes how the suspect had tried to pretend he lived in one of those fancy houses, his voice dripping with satisfaction and prejudice that would soon become his undoing. The booking officer, Sarah Martinez, sits at her desk, troubled by the nagging feeling that she's seen Thompson before. Shuffling through papers, she pulls up the department's database, but before she can complete her search, Reynolds appears behind her, suggesting she process this one quickly so we can finish his paperwork and get home. Something about his eagerness sets off warning bells in her mind, but she says nothing, watching him stride away with unearned confidence. Thompson uses his one phone call, not for his wife or a lawyer, but to his assistant Janet, knowing she will set the proper wheels in motion without drawing attention, his voice steady as he gives her a series of coded instructions that they had established years ago for emergencies. Janet immediately understands the gravity of the situation, her fingers already flying across her keyboard as she begins dismantling Reynolds' career piece by piece. In the cell's shadowy corner, Thompson observes a teenager, probably no more than 17, crying silently after being arrested for skateboarding in the business district. The boy reminds him of his own son, and Thompson makes a mental note to look into the case. Once this nightmare ends, beside him, a homeless man offers to share his stale sandwich, a gesture of humanity that nearly breaks Thompson's carefully maintained composure. The station clock ticks past midnight, its sound echoing through the nearly empty corridors as most officers head home, leaving behind a skeleton crew for the night shift. Thompson allows himself a slight smile, knowing that in less than 8 hours this very building will become ground zero for a transformation in police conduct that will ripple across the state. His practiced lawyer's mind already composing the opening statement that will shake the department's foundation, while in the evidence room, Reynolds' badge number 6891 is being logged into the system one last time, though the officer doesn't know it yet. Morning light streams through the towering courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as Officer Reynolds adjusts his collar for the 15th time in the third-floor men's room. His reflection shows dark circles under his eyes from a restless night spent rehearsing his testimony about the suspicious character who refused to comply in Oakwood Heights. Practiced lies dance on his tongue as he straightens his badge one final time, unaware that it's his last morning wearing it. 3 floors below, in the judge's chambers, Marcus Thompson commands immediate attention as he strides in wearing a fresh suit delivered by his wife, his presence sending shockwaves through the courthouse staff. Judge Elena Martinez nearly spills her morning coffee as she recognizes the state attorney general standing before her, not as a colleague, but as a defendant in what should have been a routine morning docket. The gravity of Reynolds' mistake beginning to ripple through the building like a tsunami in slow motion. The courthouse regulars notice something different in the air today. The bailiffs whisper among themselves as Thompson's assistant Janet efficiently organizes a mountain of evidence files on the prosecution table, her face bearing a slight smile that speaks of justice about to be served. The Morning Sun highlighting the gold lettering on dozens of similar case files, each one documenting Reynolds' previous discriminatory stops, carefully collected through the night by Thompson's tireless team. Reynolds practices his testimony in an empty jury room, his voice echoing off bare walls as he recites the story about community protection and suspicious behavior that has worked so many times before. In the hallway outside, 2 senior officers who had praised his arrest last night now avoid eye contact, hurrying past with newfound urgency, the weight of impending consequences already shifting loyalties throughout the department. Courthouse security officers who had watched Thompson argue countless cases in this very building now stand straighter as he passes, their faces a mix of embarrassment and respect, while the morning cleaning crew pauses their work to witness history in the making. Even the ancient elevator operator Meta Jenkins, who has served this courthouse for 40 years, shakes his head knowingly, having seen justice take unexpected turns before, but never quite like this. In the courthouse cafeteria, Reynolds grabs a quick coffee, ignorant of the fact that the barista who serves him is one of Thompson's former clients, successfully defended in a racial discrimination suit last year. She watches him dump sugar into his cup while texting her friends about the delicious irony unfolding before her, the officer still radiating the same arrogant confidence that would soon evaporate under the harsh lights of courtroom 7. The district attorney's office buzzes with unprecedented morning activity as news spreads about their boss's arrest. Junior prosecutors who had learned their craft under Thompson's mentorship huddle in corners, their faces moving from disbelief to determination as they gather supporting evidence of similar cases, building an ironclad foundation for what is about to unfold in the courtroom. The morning docket suddenly transformed from routine to revolutionary. As the hour approaches, Reynolds settles into the witness stand, his freshly pressed uniform and polished badge a stark contrast to the wrinkled suit Thompson had worn in the holding cell just hours ago. The gallery fills with an unusual mix of spectators, attorneys postponing their own cases to witness this moment, civil rights activists drawn by urgent text messages, and curious courthouse staff sensing something momentous about to unfold, none of them yet aware that they're about to witness a moment that will redefine police accountability in their state. The courtroom doors burst open with a thunderous echo that makes every head turn as Marcus Thompson rises from behind the prosecution table, his presence commanding instant silence. From the previously buzzing gallery, Reynolds' confidence falters mid-sentence as he watches Thompson approach the state attorney general badge, catching morning light and throwing golden reflections across the wooden panels. His measured footsteps against the marble floor sound like a countdown to justice. Thompson approaches the witness stand with the quiet grace of a jungle cat stalking its prey, his Italian leather shoes clicking softly against the floor, each step deliberate and purposeful. His face reveals nothing, but his eyes burn with the intensity of 15 past encounters with law enforcement, prejudice, all leading to this moment. Reynolds shifts uncomfortably in his seat as recognition slowly dawns in his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at Thompson with such contempt just hours ago on that rain-soaked lawn. The gallery holds its collective breath as Thompson adjusts his tie, gesture so casual yet somehow terrifying in its deliberateness. Even Judge Martinez leans forward slightly in her chair as Thompson opens his leather briefcase, the same one Reynolds had tossed aside during the arrest, pulling out a single photograph showing him and the governor at last month's Law Enforcement Reform Committee meeting. Reynolds' face drains of color so rapidly that the bailiff takes an instinctive step forward. Tell me, Officer Reynolds, do you make a habit of arresting homeowners for entering their own property? Or am I a special case? Thompson's first question lands like a thunderbolt in the hushed courtroom, his voice carrying the weight of generations of similar injustices. Reynolds' mouth opens and closes like a fish out of water as he struggles to reconcile the confident attorney before him with the suspicious character he had arrested the night before, his carefully rehearsed testimony crumbling like sand through his fingers. From the gallery, Thompson's wife, Catherine, watches with quiet satisfaction, her phone continuously buzzing with messages from their son's piano teacher and supporters across the state. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, sits beside her clutching a folder containing 8 years' worth of Christmas cards from the Thompson family, photos of block parties and neighborhood watch meetings, all evidence of their deep roots in the community that Reynolds had so quickly dismissed. Thompson methodically lays out his credentials on the prosecution table, each achievement a nail in the coffin of Reynolds' career: Harvard Law diploma, state bar license, federal prosecutor badge, Supreme Court appearances, and finally the deed to his Oakwood Heights home, purchased long before Reynolds had even joined the force. The officer's supervisor, Captain Richards, slides lower in his seat as he watches his department's reputation implode with each revelation, while courthouse sketchers frantically capture the historic moment, their pencils flying across paper. The morning sun now fully streams through the tall courthouse windows, illuminating particles of dust that dance in the air like suspended time, while Thompson produces his own body camera footage, a small device he had been wearing as part of his ongoing investigation into police conduct. Reynolds' eyes widen as he realizes that his victim had been documenting him all along, the footage ready to play on the courtroom screens, showing not only last night's encounter but similar incidents with other officers, creating a pattern that could no longer be ignored or explained away. Assistant district attorneys line the back wall of the courtroom, their faces a mixture of pride and anticipation, knowing that their boss is about to deliver a masterclass in prosecution, their notebooks ready to document what will surely become required reading at law schools across the country. While Reynolds continues to shrink in the witness stand, his earlier arrogance replaced by the dawning realization that his career ends today, not with a bang, but with the quiet precision of justice finally served. Raw footage from Reynolds' bodycam plays on the towering courtroom screens, casting a harsh blue glow across the spectators' faces, each frame more damning than the last as his escalating aggression against Thompson's calm dignity unfolds in high definition. The officer's voice from the previous night echoes through the state-of-the-art speaker system. People like you don't live in this neighborhood, cutting through the tense silence like a knife, while Thompson stands perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Reynolds' increasingly pale face. The footage continues, showing Thompson repeatedly attempting to point out his family photos visible through the bay window, His son's basketball on the porch, his daughter's chalk drawings on the steps, all ignored by Reynolds, who maintains his hostile stance throughout the encounter. In the present courtroom, Reynolds shifts uncomfortably as his own recorded voice grows more aggressive with each reasonable explanation. Thompson offers the officers, hands repeatedly straying to his weapon, despite no provocation. Timestamp after timestamp documenting what could have become yet another tragedy. Judge Martinez removes her glasses slowly, deliberately, her years of experience doing little to mask her growing anger, as Thompson masterfully weaves together evidence showcasing similar incidents. His assistant Janet efficiently hands him file after file, each one containing bodycam footage, traffic stop records, and civilian complaints spanning Reynolds' entire career. The prosecutors in attendance scribble furiously in their notepads, recognizing a textbook example of how to dismantle a hostile witness, while Reynolds' superior officer, Captain Martinez, slips quietly toward the courtroom exit, already drafting his own resignation letter in his mind. The evidence mounts like a tidal wave. Surveillance footage from Thompson's security system reveals 8 years of Reynolds driving past his house, running his plates, conducting unnecessary stops of visitors of color, while waving through white guests heading to the same address. Thompson produces a particularly damning clip from last Christmas showing Reynolds questioning a black federal judge who had attended the Thompsons' annual holiday party, the same party that half the courthouse staff had also attended. Gasps ripple through the gallery as Thompson plays split-screen footage showing Reynolds' contrasting treatment of residents in Oakwood Heights, one screen showing polite interactions with white homeowners, while the other displays aggressive confrontations with minorities using the same streets at the same times of day. Even the court reporter pauses her furious typing, momentarily overwhelmed by the methodical presentation of injustice laid bare in black and white. Mrs. Henderson now takes the stand as a witness, her testimony punctuated by years of meticulously kept diary entries, documenting every incident she observed from her bay window, her hands trembling slightly as she reads from pages describing Thompson shoveling her driveway in winter, hosting neighborhood watch meetings, and experiencing repeated harassment from the same officer who claimed he didn't belong. Reynolds' watch ticks loudly in the silent courtroom, each second marking another nail in the coffin of his career as his excuses crumble beneath the weight of irrefutable evidence. Through it all, Thompson maintains his professional composure, though those who know him well can see the subtle signs of emotional strain in his slightly tightened jaw, the way his signet ring taps almost imperceptibly against the podium as he presents evidence of 17 similar stops in 6 months, all involving minority professionals in Oakwood Heights, including a neurosurgeon leaving his night shift, a retired ambassador walking his dog, and now the state attorney general himself. Standing in his own front yard beside him, his wife Catherine clutches a program from their son's missed piano recital. A small but powerful piece of evidence showing the real human cost of Reynolds' actions. Thompson presents a devastating timeline that makes the entire courtroom collectively hold its breath. 70 minority professionals stopped in Oakwood Heights over 6 months. His assistant Janet efficiently projects a digital map onto the courtroom screen showing each incident marked with a glowing red dot, creating a damning constellation of discrimination centered around Reynolds' patrol route, while Reynolds' watch ticks loudly in the suffocating silence, each second drawing him closer to the inevitable end of his career. The evidence unfolds like chapters in a damning novel. First appears Dr. James Chen, chief of neurosurgery, stopped 3 times in 1 week while returning from late-night emergency surgeries. Next, Ambassador William Morris, a retired diplomat, questioned aggressively while walking his golden retriever. Then Dr. Sarah Patel, a renowned climatologist, blocked from entering her own laboratory at dawn, followed by federal judge Marcus Williams, forced to prove his residence despite living in the neighborhood for 12 years, each story building upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern that has the judicial clerk dropping his pen in shock. Reynolds squirms in the witness stand as Thompson produces security footage from his own home showing 8 years of peaceful residence. The same officer appears multiple times in these clips, harassing visitors of color to Thompson's home, including last month's incident where Reynolds had stopped a group of black law students arriving for a mentorship dinner with their state attorney general. The students, now sitting in the gallery watching justice unfold, their faces a mixture of vindication and lingering pain from their own encounter. From her elevated bench, Judge Martinez leans forward, her reading glasses catching the morning sun, as Thompson presents a statistical analysis conducted overnight by a team of data scientists from the State University. The numbers paint an irrefutable picture of Reynolds' bias in traffic stops, residence checks, and suspicious person reports, a pattern so clear it causes the court statistician to whistle softly under his breath while marking key figures in his official report. Catherine Thompson rises quietly from her seat in the gallery, approaching the evidence table with a thick leather album, the family photo book spanning their 8 years in Oakwood Heights, showing birthday parties, neighborhood gatherings, community events, and holiday celebrations. Each photograph a bullet in the armor of Reynolds' defense, especially the image from last summer's block party where Reynolds himself appears in the background, watching Thompson host the neighborhood gathering with the same suspicious glare he had worn last night. The evidence forms a noose around Reynolds' career as Thompson methodically introduces testimony from other Oakwood Heights residents, Mrs. Henderson trembling slightly as she recounts watching Thompson shovel her driveway every winter morning, Mr. Patel describing how Thompson had organized the neighborhood watch program, Williams telling how Thompson had helped his son apply to law school, each character witness painting a portrait of a man deeply woven into the community fabric that Reynolds had claimed he was infiltrating. Technological evidence mounts as Thompson introduces GPS data from Reynolds' patrol car, showing extended surveillance periods outside minority-owned homes in Oakwood Heights, cell phone tower records revealing prolonged stops near properties purchased by professional people of color, and body camera footage from other officers showing Reynolds making disparaging comments about neighborhood diversity during shift changes, the evidence rippling through the courtroom like waves in a pool of accountability, while Reynolds' former supporters on the force slide further down in their seats. Throughout the presentation, Thompson maintains his prosecutorial precision, each piece of evidence annotated, time-stamped, and verified, creating an airtight case that transforms this simple hearing into a landmark moment in police accountability, his own unjust arrest becoming a catalyst for exposing years of systematic harassment, while in the back of the courtroom civil rights attorneys scribble notes recognizing that this case will be taught in law schools for decades to come. The judge's gavel cracks like lightning, splitting the charged atmosphere of courtroom 7, not only dismissing all charges against Thompson, but recommending immediate criminal prosecution against Reynolds for civil rights violations. The sound echoes through the marble halls of justice, where decades of similar cases had ended differently, but today marks a turning point, as Judge Martinez, her voice carrying the weight of historical significance, announces the formation of a special task force to investigate systemic bias within the department. Reynolds stands stripped of his badge and gun, his shoulders slumping as courthouse security escorts him through the back corridors where he had once walked proudly, the walk of shame witnessed by rookie officers who will tell this story for years to come, a cautionary tale of power unchecked and justice delayed but not denied. While in her chambers, Judge Martinez is already drafting a precedent-setting opinion that will be cited in police reform cases across the country, her law clerk furiously taking notes as she dictates passages about equal protection and constitutional rights. Thompson emerges from the courthouse into a sea of reporters, the morning sun illuminating his face as cameras flash, capturing the moment his wrongful arrest transforms into a movement for change across the State Police Academy curriculum. His son Marcus Jr. runs through the crowd, still wearing his concert outfit from the previous night's recital, throwing himself into his father's arms, whispering, "Dad, you finally got him." But Catherine holds up her phone, showing dozens of messages from other families who'd faced similar discrimination but had lacked the power to fight back. Behind the scenes, Janet, Thompson's assistant, coordinates with civil rights organizations, scheduling town halls and training sessions for the upcoming police reform initiative, while in the police chief's office, emergency meetings convened to discuss departmental overhaul as Reynolds' case files are pulled for review, revealing a pattern of behavior that had been ignored for far too long. Officers gathering in break rooms across the city watched the live coverage on department televisions, some removing their badges to polish them as if seeing these symbols of authority in a new light. Mrs. Henderson stands on her front porch across from Thompson's house, tears streaming down her face as she watches news vans line the street where she had witnessed so many unjust stops over the years, her diary of incidents now becoming crucial evidence in the broader investigation, while neighborhood children draw chalk messages of support on the sidewalk where Thompson had been handcuffed just hours before their parents, finally feeling safe enough to let them play outside without constant supervision. In the governor's office, urgent calls are being made as legislation drafted years ago by Thompson himself is fast tracked for consideration, mandatory bias training, body camera reforms, and civilian oversight boards, no longer theoretical but immediate necessities, while at the police academy instructors hastily revised their curriculum, pulling outdated training materials and replacing them with case studies from this very incident, the scene in courtroom 7 already becoming a teaching moment for future officers. Thompson straightens his tie one final time before approaching the courthouse steps, microphones thrust toward him from every direction, but his eyes find his son in the crowd as he begins to speak, his words carrying the weight of personal experience and professional authority, announcing not just an investigation into Reynolds' conduct, but a comprehensive review of police practices statewide, his wrongful arrest becoming a catalyst for the change he had spent his career fighting to create. As Reynolds exits through the basement parking garage, facing an uncertain future of criminal charges and civil suits, Thompson stands atop the courthouse steps, his family beside him, his community behind him, and the full weight of his office now directed toward ensuring that no other professional, parent, child, or citizen faces discrimination under the color of law, his voice strong and clear as he quotes his father, a civil rights attorney himself. Justice is not a destination but a journey, and today we take another step forward together, while in the distance church bells ring, marking not just the hour but a moment of transformation in the long arc of justice.